This is Lama Tantrapa. Welcome to the Secrets of Qigong Masters, the talk show brought to you by Academy of Qidao, the first and only school in the world offering professional education in Tai Chi and Qigong coaching. To find out about the programs offered by Academy of Qidao and to learn how you too can become a certified Tai Chi or Qigong coach, please go to qigongcoaching.com. This show is also brought to you by Mastery Magazine, sponsoring the Summit of Qigong Masters, bringing to you some of the top experts in Qigong in North America. To enjoy watching the video interviews with them, please go to qigongmasters.com. Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Moses Ma, who is a serial entrepreneur and Qigong practitioner from the Bay Area, California. Thank you, Moses, for taking the time to share your knowledge and wisdom with us today.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate the introduction.
Wonderful. And with a little bit of introduction still due, would you share with us a little about your exposure to martial arts and internal arts and what initially inspired you to start practicing them?
Sure. When I was in college many lifetimes ago, I went to a great little school called Caltech, which is the best science school in the country. There's only, I think, 200 students per class, and they cherry-pick the best and brightest. And it's so stressful there that we had the highest suicide rate in the country. Out of a class of 300, 200, 3 committed suicide and over 60 drop out.
Wow.
So the stress level was so intense. It was, I think the first year I took 6 science classes and 1 humanities course. And that was the typical workload, and they were just cramming it on there. And it's a very interesting experience. It's sort of like SEAL team training for nerds. And it was so stressful that I started looking for ways to deal with the stress and to enjoy the stress level rather than feel at the effect of it. So I ran into a great teacher named Dr. Daniel Lee. You've probably heard of him. He was Bruce Lee's number 4 student. So after I saw my first Bruce Lee movie, I immediately thought, oh, this is the guy I want to study from. So he was a senior researcher at Jet Propulsion Lab. So his day job was a scientist, and his part-time work was in Tai Chi, teaching Tai Chi and Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's system. So I studied under him while I was at college, and he's a great teacher. I believe he's still teaching, so if you're in the Pasadena area, you should definitely check him out. And he taught me a lot about this sort of thing, especially what I liked the most, which was maintaining a scientific approach to understanding Qigong.
So you mentioning the practice of Jeet Kune Do, and of course, among all the myriads of martial arts styles, I resonated with that particular style a lot because Bruce Lee's approach was really close to my approach to the energy arts. See what works, discard what doesn't work, minimize your efforts, making so that the least amount of work and least amount of energy put out give you maximum result.
I do have to add one more thing that Daniel told me, Sifu Lee told me about Bruce Lee. He said Bruce had a natural talent that regular people couldn't replicate. He was really gifted. Dan had an inside hook kick from Tai Chi that he had practiced for 15 years, and he was really good at it. And then when he was sparring with Bruce, he hit him on the inside, and Bruce went, "Whoa, what did you do?" And he explained, "This is a Tai Chi kick." And he said, "Okay." And in 1 week, he did it better than Dan. He said 15 years of training couldn't match 1 week from Bruce Lee. So sometimes his way of cutting through to the simplest system is applicable if you have a great deal of talent. Other people really just need to stick to practicing and kind of refine their fundamentals before trying that so quickly. So I think that one of the issues in Qigong is Americans are very acquisitive. So they'll change from teacher to teacher and try to just take what they can, like a supermarket. Now I had one really great teacher who said, "I am not a supermarket." It's a different kind of a thing. So I think that there has to be a balance between learning a lot with your mind and then learning a lot with your being.
Of course. And what's also crucial about it is not to get discouraged by making mistakes and running into some challenges, especially in the beginning. The novices often feel like, wow, I can't really figure it out. It's too hard to remember all these moves and all these poses or whatever they're learning. And so they get discouraged. And even if they continue, they just already set in motion a certain paradigm of thinking for themselves, a certain stereotype that keeps them from excelling because they don't perceive themselves as somebody who can excel.
Yes, yes. That reminds me of a great story. I studied a bit under Ben Lo, who taught Chen system, and he had this really lovely story he told people when asked, so what's the secret to Fajing, to exploding, releasing energy? And he said, I'll tell you the story. He said his senior student one day took him aside, and Ben was the only one who had this explosive power, and he developed it relatively quickly. So the senior student, after 10 years, locked him and said, here's the key, I'm not letting you out until you tell me the inside door secret. And then Ben told him, he said, okay, the secret is this, is that, you're at a higher level than you're my senior, brother, but several years ago, you started doing this without as much passion, and you kind of did it more for the other reasons, like the meaning of your life didn't come from just training. It came from like being a teacher, being respected, all this stuff. He said somewhere along the line you lost it. So what I have to tell you is that there's no secret, just practice.
Well, this reminds me of a person who ran into somebody sweeping the street in downtown New York City and asked him, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the street sweeper said, practice.
Yes, exactly. That story actually, I didn't remember it until I met Mantak Chia, who I don't know if you've interviewed him yet. He's
many times.
Yeah, he's a great Taoist, living Taoist master. And I asked him what the name of the school it was, what the system. The system I practice is called Complete Reality Taoism and Yichuan Qigong. But he said, oh, I come from this little school called Just Practice Taoism. So that's great. Oh, yeah, that's actually the right one.
Cute.
Anyway, please continue.
Well, I imagine that you have personally experienced some setbacks or some challenges along your path. Would you share with us what those were and how you managed to overcome them, assuming you managed to overcome them?
Sure. One of my teachers, Gate Chan, who lives in Hong Kong, I studied with him for many years, and he's a teacher of complete reality system. So he taught me a secret meditation, which I said, oh, okay, I'll try it. And then he said, no, tell me any confirmatory experiences you may have. So the first 6 months, I had exploding visions and lightning in my head, and I felt my kundalini opening. And then I told him, he said, excellent, keep going and just keep telling me what happens. And I said, all right. And then the next 6 months, I noticed that it kind of calmed down, and I went through a period where actually I could see my body as glass. And after that, I even went through a year of complete celibacy and just meditated. And then after that, nothing happened. So I told him all the confirmatory experiences stopped. He said, oh, excellent. Just keep telling me what happens. Keep doing the same one. I was thinking maybe you should teach me something more advanced. So I kept doing the same one. And then after 3 years, I went back and I said, I'm still doing the same one, and there's no more confirmatory experiences. But, the funny thing is I don't care anymore. And he said, exactly. That's it. That's the right confirmatory experience. So I've done the same meditation for 20 years now. And I don't really feel any different or change, but it's woven into the fabric of my being. So that's how I dealt with, at first the sudden rush of experiences that confirm that you're on the right path. But eventually it's letting go of that need to feel that you're advancing in that area. I think it's more about deepening and enjoying and being present in the present moment.
Well, this is also something that people often refer to as the plateauing along the journey. So they climb the mountain, so to speak, and eventually reach a certain point where they're not climbing anymore. They're kind of traveling on a more or less flat surface. That's what we refer to as a plateau. And this plateauing obviously is different from peak experiences. Peak experiences, and often associated with that peak performance, comes from elevating above the plateau. So the question is, did you actually find a way to elevate yourself above the plateau, or are you still on that plateau?
I think that it's important to reach an area, a state called non-duality, where there's no plateau and there's a plateau. So what you realize is that in that calmness, you just deepen. It's more like digging. And you can dig a long time. So another great story from Complete Reality Buddhism is about a master. I forgot his name, I'm sorry. His master told him you have to dig a cave in the exact right feng shui area. So he looked for months and he found this perfect area and he found a perfect cave and he went to prepared it and started to meditate. And then another student came up and he said, "Oh my God, this is the perfect cave. Can I have it? I'm about ready to break through and create, the sacred baby or the crystallization of yin and yang energy." So he realized that he had to because he was still many years away from achieving a breakthrough. So he gave him the cave and moved on and built another one. And then the same thing happened. Yet another person showed up and said, "Can I have the cave?" And he actually did this 81 times. It took, got very good at it, so it was only a couple of months each. But on the 81st one, the person who came in and asked for it, he said, "Yes, you can have it." He was an old man then. And then the person who asked transformed into his teacher, and he said, "Then you've achieved it." It's actually giving up this idea of breaking through that you can break through. That's my belief. Although on the other hand, I don't know. I've seen very miraculous things from various teachers, and I think that there is a level of breakthrough possible.
Well, it's all relative. Instead of complete reality, I would say complete relativity is what I perceive is most appropriate for the name of my philosophy when it comes to this practice. It's all relative. So the plateau may feel like a peak to somebody who is practicing at a different level. It may also feel like a swamp to somebody who is practicing at another level. So it's all relative. It's when the person gets to the plateau, well, at least they recognize that they're on a plateau and they are not advancing. Now, well, all I need to do is to just simply check. So what is it that allowed me to advance? What were the preconditions or certain practices that really propelled me along the way? And also, what were the setbacks that kept me from advancing any further? And then it's a matter of enhancing the practices or conditions that facilitated the advancement, and also removing the setbacks or overcoming them in one way or another.
I think the better word than enlightenment is education. So the process of education doesn't really end. To someone in kindergarten, someone who graduated from high school may seem like a great advancement, but to someone who has a PhD, it isn't, right? And even after you get the PhD, the person who has the PhD knows that you don't stop. So the process of enlightenment is a process. It's like the road to Maui. It's just you have to enjoy the moment and not look at, the degree or the claim or whatever. And even education is a good example because your goal may be to become a professor and teach others, but it's not really to teach others, it's really to teach yourself. So I think if you stop learning, then teaching, it just becomes something kind of rote for you. So I think that using the word education is the right process for enlightenment in Qigong. It's something you do and you commit to for the rest of your life because it improves your life. And the key is to see if you're enjoying the present moment of doing Qigong. When you actually do the Qigong, are you in a state of bliss or whatever, or pain? Often when you do the horse dance, it's pain. But if you're enjoying that moment, then you're doing the right thing.
Well, some people enjoy pain too. Well, and of course, this is like education. It's a lifelong education process. And I really like the fact that you brought it in the same fashion, that what's a great accomplishment to one graduating from high school is no big deal to another person who is at the PhD level. And even interviewing masters of different disciplines and different styles, I often ask them, so what's your next level? Or how are you going to get to the next level in your journey? And there is always next level. Even the person who I interviewed who had I think, 10th degree black belt. I said, well, I know that from my experiences getting a black belt, it simply means that you are on the right track, and now you're really starting a serious training.
Right.
Well, how about
exactly.
the 10th degree black belt? And he goes, that's how I feel now, that now I'm really training for real.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, would you say that there were some funny, hilarious, or perhaps embarrassing experiences that you went through in your training yourself?
I'd like to share with you two experiences that were really powerful and meaningful to me. And the ones I remember, one is seeing a teacher named Professor Yu in Fort Mason many years ago when he was teaching. When I walked in, he had so much power. He and Madam Yu and his wife were able to send energy throughout the room. And the entire room was like people rolling around and jumping up and down. And I noticed that if you'd send energy to someone who wasn't looking at them, they would actually fall down. I was going, oh, this is real. So, and as a physicist, I was really interested in this because I was thinking, wow, if we could measure this chi energy and prove that it actually works and is real, it's sort of like when Madame Curie discovered radiation. Everybody thought she was crazy, but she had to scientifically prove that it existed. And what happened was that they said, well, where's this radiation? I don't see any. She said, you have to find stuff that has it, right? That has the energy. So she found pitchblende and certain radioactive things, and they discolored photographic plates without light. So she proved that example existed. So I was very interested in this and have kind of chased teachers who can do this, and I've studied with a number of them. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that one experiment you yourself can do if you don't have as much energy as these great masters is I would play with insects. So I noticed that if a spider is walking, if you send energy into the spider, it will stop. And when you stop, it'll start walking again. And you can actually do that kind of regularly. And one time when I was about a foot away from a spider and I sent energy in, it stopped and it suddenly jumped a foot to my finger and just hugging the finger, going, oh yeah, this is great energy. And I was like, oh, that is very interesting. I said, you're welcome. You can become king of the spiders now. But I think that a scientific instrument that measures chi would be the great breakthrough of the 21st century that could mix East and West. And as a scientist and also someone who practices Qigong, that's one thing I hope could be produced someday. But the key is to find sources of this energy, like radioactivity, in order to be able to experiment with it. But anyway, I urge the viewers to try that. Just try sending energy into an insect, which seems to be relatively sensitive to this energy.
I would say every living being, be that an insect or even a plant, can sense energy. Now, of course, everything is made of energy in our universe. As a scientist, you probably would agree with that. A friend of mine, Mark Johnson, puts it this way: Chi equals mc squared. I think he's not the first one who came up with that formula, but what do you think of that? That if everything is made of energy, then trying to measure something that we think is chi is like, well, trying to measure the whole universe.
Well, as a scientist, it's important to start with fundamentals and just be able to measure something. So I think that some kind of a detector that would be able to measure chi would be very valuable. And if you take the ego out of the equation, because a lot of people, masters, will, kind of do it and they'll end up faking it with students who kind of play along in demonstrations to prove that they have it. And others will feel like, ashamed that they don't have that ability after many years. But I think what's important is to actually be able to measure it. There was a scientist named Dr. Robert John at the Pear Lab, the Princeton Applied Physics Research Lab. And what he discovered is that if you move an object or lift an object a millionth of a pound, you can actually do that repeatedly. So what he did is he had a mu metal shielded superconducting magnetometer that could measure like a millionth of a Gauss, like a millionth of the Earth's magnetic field. And he noticed that if people concentrated, they could change the heat or the magnetic field inside that environment very accurately, almost anybody. But to make it like a few pounds was very difficult. But he noticed that if you use this device, you could slowly train yourself to increase the amount of chi you can emit and change reality. So yeah, I think that energy does equal mc squared, but c is not the speed of light; it's the power of consciousness.
Interesting. And how do you measure that?
You know, I've done a lot of research, but I'm not ready to talk about it. But I have seen a significant amount of psychic phenomena, and I think that there are ways to measure concentration in energy, and that it does affect this reality, but it basically pushes it into a separate dimension, which isn't easily measurable. But again, this is like stuff that nobody's figured out. So I'll tell you another story. I actually spent a year traveling in Asia looking for teachers, and I met the top monk in Malaysia, who the Buddhist monk, and he had a great fortune-telling abilities. So when I showed up, it was like a beautiful day, and he gives me an umbrella, and he said, "This is for you." I said, "Thank you." You know, and then noticed that they prayed over and put like little pieces of wax over or something, or seals on it. And then I sat down, and so he asked me, "What do you want to ask?" I said, I'm getting my PhD in physics, and I was wondering, is this the right thing for me to do?" I said, "To understand psychic phenomena, document it, and then come up with theory and publish it." And it's basically like scientific suicide to do that, because anybody doing this kind of stuff is considered not to be a real scientist anymore. So he actually meditated, and he came back and he said, "No, because even if you do, the West isn't ready. So in this lifetime, you'll not be able to do that." I said, "Oh." And then I asked, "What am I supposed to be doing with my life?" Then he went and meditated, and he came back out and he said, I don't understand this image. And I said, "What?" He said, "I see millions of people connected together by some kind of machine. I don't understand it." And then that actually, I took
It's
that.
called the internet.
Exactly, but he didn't understand it. He said, "It has to do with business or something, but it's millions of people connected together by some machine." And I said, "Oh." And then with that information, I started a video game company 20 years ago, and I built the world's first internet playable video game. And because I just saw and this was before the internet. It only ran over the Apple Talk network. And then when the internet came along, we were the first game to play on the internet. And then a senior researcher from IBM came to visit and said, "I have a question." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "How did you get this idea?" And I told him the story, and he said, "That's very fascinating." He said, "Because I have like 100 researchers working on this exact same problem, and you beat us to it." And they were working on something called the TLC project, the last computer. So they had this idea that everything would connect over the internet, except it didn't exist yet. And that someday this thing would exist, which they called the last computer, because their theory was that the telephone came out and it evolved, and then it stabilized to allow this network to work, the phone network. So they believed that the computer would actually stabilize the same way that a telephone would, and then that would be the last computer, which is completely wrong, right? Because it keeps evolving due to Moore's law. So anyway, yes, I've actually been very interested in the convergence of technology and consciousness. And, in terms of, if you look again at education as Qigong and meditation, I'm not really a professor type that teaches. I'm more of a research scientist. So I just have been happily researching this stuff and then collecting, and I'm not ready to publish because it's a really big problem. It's it's bigger than like there's this math prize. They give you $1 million if you solve one of the 7 math prizes. And this problem of figuring out how chi and consciousness connect with matter and reality is beyond any of that stuff. So I don't think any of us will be solving it in our lifetimes, but I think maybe we could make one small step that helps humanity get there.
Well, and you might have also heard of James Randi Foundation, the famous magician James Randi,
Yeah.
whose foundation put out $1 million prize that will be awarded to anyone who demonstrates that he or she has supernatural abilities of any sort.
Yeah.
And so those abilities that you are researching and looking into perhaps would qualify as supernatural to some extent, and that would be another good prize to look into.
It would be, but honestly, I'm not interested in prizes. After I saw some psychic phenomena in Asia, the desire to publicize it went away. The desire to understand it and master it is still there, but the need to figure it out for the rest of humanity, for some odd reason, it just doesn't appeal to me anymore. I'm more interested in making small breakthroughs. So I in my day job, I have a venture incubator, and we have a number of interesting companies that are making small but fun breakthroughs in technology that help the world. So that's what I've been working on.
And I would imagine that there is also a distinction between the way that you practice and approach the energy arts as opposed to most other people's or most other teachers and practitioners because of your scientific background and also your exposure to some remarkable practitioners.
I'd say that the primary difference, since I'm an innovation consultant part of the time and do deal with innovations, is I'm actually willing to study and see the reality of Qigong. And then I'm happy to innovate. For example, the latest thing I've been working on is combining biking, long distance road biking with Qigong. I guess you could call it Qi biking.
Yes.
But the combination of the two actually is very interesting and feels good. So when you're biking, you are very present. You attach to in addition to your breathing, to the cadence of the riding, and to just being really aware and conscious and stopping the inner dialogue. And also, if you want, you could chant while doing this. And then every 20 minutes you stop and you kind of do standing post. So I'm probably getting a rep as the crazy Chinese guy who's like doing Qigong on the side of bike road. So if you see some guy doing this next to a bike route, you know it's me.
Well, there are millions of people biking in China, so I think some of them are those Qigong practitioners that also combine biking with Qigong. Now, what would you say inspired you to start promoting Qigong online? I know that you do a fair amount of social networking and promoting the energy arts in a variety of different ways. What was your inspiration?
I actually had a vision of that was something that was important to do. It came in a dream that this information should you leverage the internet, but I haven't. I did a few experiments earlier. I did a website called Tantra TV, one Tantra that allowed people to learn about Tantra. It was actually relatively successful. But the latest thing I'm doing is I'm working on a top secret project. I joke because it's not really top secret. It's just what I'm working on.
I won't tell anyone, I promise.
Anyway, so I believe that it's possible to achieve a physical transformation in our being by following what I call the 8 E's, and the first step is energy. You have to learn how to do Qigong and do this inner work. But I also think that you have to integrate and do a comprehensive lifestyle change that includes things like exercise, evolutionary diet, detox. I think one of the biggest E's after that is exhaustion, that the current pace of life and the use of technology when you use your iPad in bed, it completely changes your natural sleep pattern. You have to look at that. And I think that the other 4 are endocrinology, enthusiasm, and equanimity. So these 7 are very valuable. And the 8th one I call is encouragement, social encouragement. I think it's possible to use these network tools like you're doing right now to encourage others to deepen and to follow a lifestyle, adhere to a lifestyle change. So we're looking at things like the Apple Watch and other technologies to integrate into a comprehensive program that would be, the Facebook of transformation. So what's more interesting to me is to figure out what that really simple thing is and then release that. That would have the greatest change in the world. So that's what I'm concentrating on, is figuring out this big foundational shift that you could do that actually help people preserve their life and rejuvenate.
Fascinating. Oh, this is really remarkable. And also, if you don't mind, I would like to add one more E to this list of E's.
Yes.
Emotions.
Oh, yes.
They definitely wreak havoc in many people's lives, and also can be used as a wonderful facilitator of our own transformation if we use emotions right. So this is definitely something that also manifests somatically in our physical bodies. And if we are in one emotional state or another, obviously we're going to have different patterns of tension and different postural dynamics, which of course will cause certain energy blockages, which will affect the functioning of the internal organs and also potentially cause discomfort or pain
Yeah,
if held for a long time.
have you read the book Emotional Wisdom by Dina Saxer and Nata Chia? It's a really good treatment of Qigong and emotions, and it talks about which organs and which exercises. They do a lot of work with the healing sounds. They said that seems to be effective in this area. But yeah, I completely agree. For me, I think that I'm more, success oriented. So I think of emotions not as like trying to fix things in your past and forgiving your parents. I think of it more as the two E's: enthusiasm and equanimity. So enthusiasm is having the sufficient motivational energy to achieve what you want to achieve, and using your chi power to funnel directly into that area. The other one is equanimity, which is reducing stress and learning how to absorb the stresses of modern life, which are much greater than before. One of my favorite stories, I helped, I don't know if you've heard of Jack Canfield. He wrote a book called Chicken Soup. So I helped him write a couple of chapters of his latest book. And the story I put in there is that in 1905, the national highway speed limit when the cars first came out was 5 miles an hour, because some doctors went and testified in Congress that human beings were not built to move at such speeds as daredevils would drive, like 40 or 50 miles an hour. So they recommended that it be 5 miles an hour, because their theory was that if a human being was subjected to a car traveling at over 20 miles an hour, they would go insane. And if you look today, human beings can actually drive 80 miles an hour while putting on makeup and drinking coffee, which would be kind of
texting at the same time.
Yeah, so human beings are changing, but the level of stress that you actually are under while driving is so much greater than you had in 1905 that you have to be cognizant of it. So I think managing that level of stress, which is tacit and not spoken in this life, in this modern life, is really important.
Absolutely. And this actually goes hand in hand with my approach to Qigong. As you might have heard me mentioning, I pioneered this whole profession of Qigong coaching, and essentially not focusing on the emotions that we try to fix from the past, forgiving parents, as you said, but rather what is the energy associated with these emotions available in the present moment, and how does it relate to the energy associated with where we would like to be if we get to live our dreams. And if this energy is not the same, well, how can we access the energy associated with manifesting and living our dreams, so that, again, it's not past-oriented, it's actually future-oriented, developing greater access to certain resources or manifesting our potential. This probably goes hand in hand with a lot of your innovative approaches, because obviously I have to innovate a lot when I integrate this ancient energy arts of Qigong with the modern methodology of coaching. But there is the technological innovation that you started talking about. And I wonder if you can share with us a little bit about what is it that you are also known for, using Qigong in business consulting.
Yeah, actually, I have a blog at Psychology Today called The Tao of Innovation, and I share insights we have about this. I've also put some of it into a book that I co-authored with Langdon Morris, who's a leading innovation consultant, and Dr. Po-Chi Wu, who had a $1 billion venture fund, which is innovation in China. The art of innovation is basically a martial art that, if you approach it the right way, it's life-changing. It goes beyond just like a technique that some companies would use to generate product concepts. It becomes a way of not only getting things done, but a way of being. So anyway, that book is called Agile Innovation. You can get it at Amazon. We also have another book coming out, which I and another co-author, Jerome Conlon, who was he ran branding at Nike and Starbucks. We have this theory that the energy field that we know around that surrounds the body also surrounds a company or an enterprise, and we call it the brand energy field, and that you can actually change and modulate that brand energy by doing things that look a lot like Qigong. So in a sense, we're actually teaching enterprise Qigong to companies to rejuvenate their innovative capacity, to revitalize their energy, to stay young and agile, and to react to these new stresses. Like right now, if someone badmouths you on the internet, it could snowball into something that would be equivalent to a brand Chernobyl. So you have to be much more cognizant and have these huge brand awareness command center built in large companies. But anyway, Deepak Chopra read an advanced copy and he said that this book is visionary and lays out the future of branding for any company that wants to remain relevant in the 21st century. And he also said that in today's new business environment, if your brand doesn't have a soul, it's dead. So to become aware of how to create a soulful, iconic brand is like the next big thing. And we're doing a couple of workshops, one around core creativity and peak performance. That will happen in December. You can find out more about it at futurelabconsulting.com. And that will be in partnership with Jack Canfield. So we're doing something with the world's most famous motivational expert to take these new age motivational techniques and embed them in releasing your core creativity. And then Jerome and I and a couple of others are building something called Brand Spark. The workshop with Jack will be called Mind Spark. And Brand Spark uses many of the same techniques as well as very solid and innovative marketing and branding practices into a workshop called Brand Spark. So those will be available towards the end of this year and next year as well.
I wonder if you can share with us a little bit about the defining moment that inspired you to start combining Qigong with other disciplines, for example, business consulting.
Yes, half my time I run a venture incubator. We develop software and startups. The other half I consult. So I've consulted for one of the largest banks in the country. I'm now consulting for one of the largest global health organizations, and I generally only consult very infrequently to a senior executive. It was, I think, 15 years ago, they asked me to put together a brainstorming, and I had actually just sat in on a brainstorming by the people who invented brainstorming. I won't mention who they are, but they're a really big consulting company. And when I went in, it was like flickering fluorescent lights. There was like really terrible food. And the person in the front would say, I want 5 more ideas. Before we go to lunch, I want 5 more ideas. And this was like he was pushing for ideas. And this was the classic way of doing it. So what I decided was I invented a new method that I called the Brain Spa, which I've actually, with my partners, refined into a complete program, which is based on visual recording and things. But in that Brain Spa, what we did is we had energy drinks instead of coffee. We had breaks for yoga and Qigong. And then we also had many techniques, for loosening up the mind. So we didn't like make it directed like someone telling you what to do, and help be cognizant of the energy of innovation, of ideation, and of creativity. There's a book by Gopi Krishna called The Biological Basis of Genius. And his theory was that Kundalini is actually the basis of creativity. So if you can open your primary meridian and the Kundalini goes in your brain, you'll actually think of great thoughts. So that's sort of what we do is we look at that energy level, but we don't actually tell people that we're doing that. We actually have very, normal business approaches, but underneath it, we do these techniques. For example, one client we had a while back was unable to deliver something they needed for us to be able to do what we wanted for them. It was producing the content, and it was like not a lot of content they had to produce, but they were blocked, right? They literally had writer's block, and the 3 key people, because it was a really big problem. So they had us fly out, and what we did was we did Gurdjieffian self-remembering exercises. There's this exercise where you look at a watch with a second hand. It's called self-remembering, and you just look at the watch, and as it ticks, you just are completely present on the watch and in your body, and not having thoughts. And then when you have a thought, you would say, I had a thought, And most people would not be able to get past 15 seconds in today's world because they just can't continue a thought long enough to have that thought be re-stimulated by an internal thought. So they'll get interrupted. And I actually learned this because when I had my video game company, my mom's best friend's kids would all say, oh, can we go, work at Uncle Moses' video game company this summer? So we had so many people wanting to test our video games that I said, only if you got straight A's. If you get straight A's, you can come and work as a tester. And that kind of motivated, my family's friends' kids to do that. But one of the friends said, "Can you help my son? Suddenly he went from straight A's to straight C's, right?" And he had just like turned 15, I think. So I went and met with him, and I said, I heard you want to come and work for the company, and I was wondering, so why did the grades fall? I said, I don't know. He's like becoming a typical teenager. And I said, okay, do this watch staring exercise. And he did it, and he lasted like 3 seconds before he had another thought, right? I said, you're thinking about a girl. He goes, yeah, I'm in love, and that was it. I said, oh. I said, well, that's actually great. And then what we did is we said, she'll always be there, and actually she'll love you more if you're successful. So why don't we just do this? And then we got him to about 30 seconds. If you can hold your consciousness about 30 seconds, it's long enough that you can actually get over ADHD, right? So the attention deficit disorder kind of is eliminated. So he actually went from straight C's to straight A's again, just from that one technique, and just learning how to control his mind, which is like a horse that starts running off in weird directions unless you take control of it. So the Qigong of the mind is to be able to control your awareness in this way. So meditation and stuff we do like that, we use in our practice to help that company. So that group that was blocked, they had us come in and we did a 3-hour workshop that we call a focus lab. And we did these techniques. And one of the people said we actually would do that technique, get everyone to pass 30 seconds, and then they would do work for 20 minutes and we would do Qigong. And at the first Qigong break, one of the people said, I do Qigong, I love Qigong. So it's actually kind of a beautiful story. But anyway, the end result was at the end of that day, they did a month worth of work in 3 hours because they were actually able to focus. And it looked a bit like high school detention because every 10 minutes they would people would want to talk to each other, and I'd say focus. And they would go back and focus, right? So it looked very much like that. But instead of like a punitive detention, it was really kind of participatory, where people were learning to train their minds. So I think that's an important thing to do. And the technique is so powerful, we're going to launch it in the San Francisco Bay Area as a test case to help people just deal with the stress of information technology these days. We have so many things interrupting us. It's very difficult to hold your consciousness and awareness to a single point of focus and the task at hand. So we'll be unveiling the Focus Lab program, sometime later this year.
Well, so this is an excellent application of energy awareness in daily life, isn't it?
Yes, and the point is that if you have no Qi, you can't do it. Like if you're really tired,
well, you're not alive.
Energy, you have no life. So that's why we say do the Qigong. Eat a good breakfast before you come in. It's fine to drink coffee, just don't drink too much of it. And so there are many techniques you can use to apply in this. But I think the more important thing is there's tactical business and there's strategic business. I think tactical is good for Qigong and things that coaching would do. But I think that at a higher level, strategic coaching and helping with business strategy requires something more like the art of war and Sun Tzu and a different way of thinking. So I think that that's more applicable to Taoism as a philosophy than tactics that you would use to address things like daily focus and work tracking.
You mentioned Taoism, and of course, before you were talking about Buddhism, and I wonder if you can share with us a little bit about your Taoist studies and also where you envision yourself as a Taoist practitioner.
Yeah, so I said before, if you look at meditation and enlightenment as an educational process, I'm more of a research scientist than a professor. So in general, I take very few students. Only if they're like really interesting. Like I've had one student who was a theoretical physicist, so it's kind of fun to talk with him. Another student who was a billionaire, which was kind of an interesting student. So I like interesting students, and I kind of don't have the time to teach. So I generally only teach in the consulting business. But I think that like in the educational process, when you're young and you first go to college, you shouldn't go to college saying, I want to be a doctor. You should go to college to say, I want to learn how to learn, and then I want to learn what it is I want to do with the rest of my life, and give yourself the freedom to try different teachers. If you kind of focus on a teacher too early in your career, what'll happen is you'll probably end up saying, "Oh, I should have studied with a different teacher." So I think that when you start doing this, you should look around and find one that you have an emotional connection to. And then when you do find that, you should focus and get your PhD in that brand of Qigong. I'll tell you one story. I spent a year traveling through Asia looking for teachers in psychic phenomena. And the most interesting story was I met this master of Tunbei, who had retired and he stopped teaching, but he's one of the greatest martial artists in China. His hands were bright red, right? So he had studied, it's this one system that's beyond iron palm. And you actually have to break your bone. The last stage is after you meditate and do the sand pits, you actually have to hit something and crack that bone and then meditate to send energy in. And it changes the nature of your bones, right? And then, so I like hit his arm and it felt like iron rods, right, hitting me. So the first time I met him in Hong Kong, he was a night watchman at an apartment complex, and his entire room was like 8 feet by 8 feet with a bed, and that was it. And all he did was he would do standing meditation, except that when he stood, you could actually literally feel the energy shaking around him. It's very powerful field. So the very first minute I met him, I looked at him and I burst into tears and I couldn't stop crying for 6 hours. And one of my classmates asked the teacher who brought me there and said, Sifu, why is Moses crying so much? It's really embarrassing, And, my teacher said, it's karmic, it's just let it go, let it happen. So I just literally couldn't stop crying. It was just like tears were flowing, because when you meet the right teacher, it's that strong. And you won't meet the right teacher if you marry the first one you date. So I highly recommend that you travel and that you meet many teachers and you actually be kind of open and date them for a while, to study for a month with each one, and then be very respectful when you move on. So that's sort of my own story. So my own story is I like this one brand of Taoism, and I've just studied it for, I don't know, like 30 years now, and it has had interesting effects. I'm not able to Fa Jing, but I noticed that with students that I'm connected to, one of the tests I do is I have students close their eyes and stand, and then I'll send out energy saying, lower your hands, raise them left and right. And if there are like 3 or 4 students, one actually did that. Whenever I sent the command, his hands lowered, raised, and moved left and right. And I didn't tell them to do that. It was just naturally happening. So I realized that everyone has this energy, but it's also not how strong you are, but how receptive your students are. So sometimes the students that love you, they absorb your energy more easily so they can receive it. So I think that this is a really fascinating area, and it's an area that's worthy of lifelong study and practice.
Absolutely. And speaking of lifelong study and practice, I imagine you have some vision as to where you're going yourself with your practice and with your teaching and applications of energy practices. Where would you like to be in a year from now as a Qigong practitioner?
I really would like to be able to figure out this Fa Jing thing, because I'm a scientist, and if you were an anthropologist, you have to go live in a tribe to really...
Yes, I am.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, I kind of want to experience this ability, right? So I've met teachers who can do this. I've heard about teachers who can move objects. There's one that's on the internet that can start fires. I believe that these actually do happen, but it's because the universe isn't ready to learn this, or the planet isn't ready to learn it yet. I think that if you kind of expose it too prematurely, it will stop you. So I like one teacher who was showing some magic ability on the internet. I never met him, but he actually stopped being on the internet, and when someone reached him, he said that he got some message that he shouldn't be doing that, right? So I think that maybe the world's not ready, but I'm having a great time along the way.
Wonderful. Well, let me ask you about your practice, the way it is now and where you're going with it. How would it help make our world a better place?
I think the 2 areas that would be really useful to apply mindfulness and Qigong. One is in the area of what Jack Canfield teaches in the success principles, applying them in a behavioral manner, or like what you do with coaching, exactly, to just achieving the things you want in life. And not expecting to become like a great enlightened master, but to just use these lessons to learn how better to share who you are, to what I call unlimit your participation in life. So we actually put all these constraints and blinders on that keep us from seeing clearly and from participating fully. And then the other one is when you can learn how to focus, you actually increase your presence. So cultivating presence, emitting and emanating an energy of positivity and success in life, sharing your meaning and your why into the world, and then forging like really deep and meaningful and juicy and yummy relationships with people. And I think the last one is Qigong gives you the energy to lean into life. If you're tired and exhausted and you're not doing what you love, you will not have enough energy to lean in. And leaning in is the most important thing to achieving success in your life.
Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by leaning?
Yeah. One thing I've noticed is some people talk a lot about writing their book or doing this or that, but in reality, they just like to talk about it. They don't actually write a book. So the last book I wrote it with two partners because I don't like to do the editing phase. I like to do the first blast of writing. So we pitched the book to a large publisher, and they loved the concept. And we needed to write a draft really quickly. So I just checked myself into a hotel for 10 days and wrote the first draft of a 250-page book in 10 days, right? So if you focus and you do it, you just get it done. So the only things I did was write, do Qigong and go for hikes and eat and sleep. Those are the four things I did those 10 days. And I actually had a really promising first draft that was incredibly complicated and was just more like a brain dump. And my partners, who are great editors, took it and then refined it and turned into a really nice book that has gotten like 50 rave reviews. And so we're pretty happy about that. So I think you can actually take this energy of Qigong to not only learn how to lean in, but to maintain that energy in a focused manner to continue making it happen until it actually does.
So I suspect that what you mean by leaning on energy is kind of similar to the term that I use in my teachings all the time, as being in the flow. Essentially trusting that if you feel the flow of qi and you recognize where it's flowing, then you simply allow that flow to guide you and support you. And you will not have to struggle as much. You will not have to suffer, because suffering happens when you go against the flow by and large.
Yeah. Also, I think it's another level, which is directing the flow. So some people have natural energy. In fact, people who have ADHD are basically have a lot of mental energy, and they can't contain it because it goes into different directions, like a wild horse. So the energy needs to be controlled, and it's nice to let the horse run the way it's going to run when there's no impediments, but you don't want it to run off a cliff, right? So you really do want to not only increase the amount of energy, but to guide it. So, but yes, in this world, I completely agree. The first step is to actually feel the energy, and a lot of people aren't even aware of that energy.
Right. Well, it's fascinating that you bring up horse several times in this interview, and your last name is Ma.
Yes.
Does it mean horse in Chinese?
It does mean horse, yes. I'm from northwest China, where all the ranchers were, so it was like the area just filled with horses and cows. So, Mom.
Wonderful. Well, and the last question that I would like to ask before we wrap up for today is, how else can our listeners and viewers of this interview benefit from knowing about your work and where they can find more information?
I'm more like the traditional teachers that force you to sit on my doorstep for 3 days before I'll accept you. So I tell people I'm not going to give you a URL or an email address. That if you're really interested, you should look for me. I'm on the web. You can find me. There are other Moses Ma's out there, but you'll find me and you can send me an email. But if you don't have that much energy, I'm not interested. So come and sit on my doorstep for 3 days and impress me, and then we can talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Moses.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today. And let me just remind our listeners and viewers that you are enjoying the interview with Moses Ma on the talk show The Secrets of Qigong Masters, brought to you by Academy of Qidao, the first and only school in the world offering professional education in Qigong coaching and Tai Chi coaching. To find out about the programs offered by Academy of Qidao, please go to qigongcoaching.com. This show is also brought to you by Mastery Magazine, bringing under one roof numerous masters of Qigong, Tai Chi, and related disciplines. You are welcome to enjoy watching the interviews with them at qigongmasters.com.